He was born in Kentucky and grew up on the Indiana frontier. With little formal schooling, he became an attorney and moved to Illinois. He served one term as a Whig congressman opposed to the Mexican War, then returned to his legal practice in Illinois. Joining the new Republican Party, he debated Stephen Douglas but lost the race for the U.S. Senate. He won the Republican presidential nomination over towering party figures like William Seward and Salmon Chase. He opposed the expansion of slavery into the territories, and after his election, Southern states began seceding from the Union. Through 4 long years, he led the war effort to save the Union. Along the way, he issued the Emancipation Proclamation and framed the war as a test of democracy in the Gettysburg Address. He was the first president in more than 30 years to win re-election. He proposed lenient terms for Reconstruction and supported the 13th Amendment to abolish slavery. But as the war was ending, his life was cut short by an assassin's bullet. Now he belongs to the ages. He is our nation's 16th president, Abraham Lincoln. Let's take a look on a map at some sites associated with Abraham Lincoln, and there is a lot to see. Lincoln was born in Hodgenville, Kentucky, which is in this area here, and you can today visit the National Park Service site there. There's a big memorial and a replica of the cabin in which Lincoln was born. And nearby at Knob Creek, in the same general area, there is another replica of the Lincoln cabin and farm. Much of his life, though, was spent in Indiana and in Lincoln City. In this general area, there's another National Park Service site where you can see the museum and a small living history area that shows the life of the Lincolns on the frontier in the early 19th century. Lincoln then moved on to New Salem in Illinois. It was then the capital of Illinois, just a little bit to the north of Springfield, and there today is Lincoln's New Salem State Historic Site, and it is another living history site. It's a small village recreated to its appearance at the time that Lincoln lived there. There is a lot to see in Springfield. There is the Lincoln Home site, which you can tour. There is the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum. There is the old state capitol where Lincoln gave his House Divided speech. And there's also the law office across from the old capitol and the train depot where Lincoln left to go to his inauguration when he famously said, "I know not when or whether ever I may return." Lincoln is also buried in Springfield at Oak Ridge Cemetery. Another location to look at, of course, as I move across the country here towards Washington, at Gettysburg is where he gave the Gettysburg Address, and it's always good to visit the National Cemetery there and see that location. In Washington, you can visit Ford's Theater, which has a museum as well as the reconstruction of the theater itself and the presidential box. And across the street, you can see Peterson House, which is the house where Lincoln died. Another site in Washington is the Lincoln's cottage at the Soldiers' Home. This is where Lincoln would travel on horseback a lot of times during the summer. And during the day, he'd spend a lot of time there doing work and relaxing at the Soldiers' Home. Now let's take a look at some photographs of these locations. Let's take a look at some books in my collection relating to the life and times of Abraham Lincoln. It's hard to know where to begin. First of all, I will say I do have a lot of books on the Civil War. I'm not going to show you all of those, but certainly I have and would recommend the Shelby Foote's trilogy, The Civil War, A Narrative. I have books by Civil War historians Bruce Catton and James McPherson. Those are some good authors. The Civil War book that came out at the time of the PBS documentary by Ken Burns. I have a newer book called The Civil War in Color. It shows you a lot of the photographs that you may or may not have seen over the years of the Civil War colorized, which is very interesting. I have a Civil War dictionary. I have a number of books regarding specific battles and guides to battlefields. And I have a good book, April 1865, The Month That Saved America by Jay Winnick is a book that I would recommend, and another book called Richmond Burning about the occupation of Richmond at the end of the Civil War. So the books that I have here that we're going to go through quite quickly are all books relating specifically to President Lincoln, to his family, or his administration. I do have a couple of books on a couple of Lincoln's cabinet members. I will reserve those for the Andrew Johnson episode, since those figures did play important roles in the Johnson administration. So I'm going to begin with the famous biography of Lincoln by Carl Sandburg. Now, this originally was published in 1954, and as a 2-volume biography. This is a reprint in 1 volume, but it's simply called Abraham Lincoln, The Prairie Years and the War Years. Now, you might be familiar with the Lincoln collection of the Coonhart family. They have a lot of photos and documents related to Lincoln's life. This book came out in 1992, Lincoln, an Illustrated Biography. It goes through Lincoln's life and presidency and contains a lot of fascinating photographs and other memorabilia. In 2008, the Coonharts put out another book called Looking for Lincoln, The Making of an American Icon. And this sort of picks up beginning with Lincoln's assassination and going through the years and decades after that with all sorts of fascinating photos relating to Lincoln's life and the Civil War and Lincoln's perception in Americana and his place in history and how that's changed over the years. Now, a good place to visit is the Abraham Lincoln birthplace in Kentucky. There's another national park site in Indiana where Lincoln grew up, and of course the Lincoln home in Springfield. These are 3 different national park sites, and there's a booklet called Abraham Lincoln, A Living Legacy that covers his life in all those places with some great photographs. You can get that through the National Park Service. These kinds of things you can find all over the place, but this is a collection of Abraham Lincoln's great speeches. This is a good book, edited by the Civil War historian Harold Holzer. It's the Lincoln-Douglas Debate, the first complete unexpurgated text. So this came out in 1993, and it has an introduction, and then it goes through each of the debates during the 1858 Senate race between Abraham Lincoln and Stephen A. Douglas, gives an introduction to them, and then obviously you can read the actual text. A very good book that came out in 2005 by Doris Kearns Goodwin. You may well have heard of this. It's called Team of Rivals, The Political Genius of Abraham Lincoln. And it covers the Lincoln administration and the members of Lincoln's cabinet, a couple of whom were presumptive presidential nominees, and all of which were strong figures. You can see here Seward, Chase, Stanton, and Bates. And it's the story of how Lincoln took all of these strong individuals, put them in his cabinet, and their relationship prior to and during the Lincoln administration. Another very good book, Lincoln at Gettysburg, The Words That Remade America by Gary Wills. This was published in 1992, and it, of course, contains the Gettysburg Address and some reflections on the Gettysburg Address and what it means. This book was published in 1997. It's called Re-electing Lincoln, The Battle for the 1864 Presidency by John C. Waugh. And it's the complete story of the 1864 election. When Lincoln was up for re-election, he faced George McClellan, his former general, who received the Democratic nomination. This is a great book as well about Lincoln's second inauguration and his second inaugural address. It's called Every Drop of Blood, The Momentous Second Inauguration of Abraham Lincoln. It's by Edward Acorn, and it was published in 2020. I have some books relating to Lincoln's assassination. This is a book that was originally published back in 1955. It's called The Day Lincoln Was Shot by Jim Bishop. Here's a more recent account called American Brutus, John Wilkes Booth and the Lincoln Conspiracies by Michael Kaufman, and it was published in 2004. And I have Bill O'Reilly's book, Killing Lincoln, The Shocking Assassination That Changed America Forever. This book was published in 2011. And one more book from the Kuhnharts. This was actually the first one to be published back in 1965. It's called 20 Days, and it is the story of the Lincoln assassination with a lot of photographs. There's another site that you can visit in Washington. It's President Lincoln's cottage at the Soldiers' Home. And this is a little booklet that tells about it. And finally, I have The Last Lincolns, The Rise and Fall of a Great American Family by Charles Lockman. This book was published in 2008. And this tells the story of the Lincoln family after Lincoln's assassination. It's quite fascinating. There's a lot of really great information in there. Our next episode will cover an American president who was never president of the United States, the first and only chief executive of the Confederate States of America, Jefferson Davis.